No, she's not having surgery. That was my daughter's voice cutting through the hospital room. Sharp, cold, final. I could barely move. My body felt broken in places I didn't know could break. Every breath scraped against something raw inside my chest. The fluorescent lights above me burned too bright, and the machines around me beeped in rhythms I couldn't follow. But I heard her clearly. The doctor, standing beside my bed, straightened, his expression shifting from concern to confusion. "Ma'am, I need to explain. Your mother has internal bleeding. Without surgery, she could—" "I understand what you're saying," Tiana interrupted, "but I'm her medical proxy, and I'm saying no." Medical proxy. Those words echoed in my head like a bad dream. I had signed papers years ago, both my children, equally. Not just her. Both of them. So why was she speaking like I didn't matter anymore? I tried to lift my hand, tried to speak, but pain seized my ribs and stole my voice. All I could do was watch her cross her arms, her jaw set tight, her eyes avoiding mine completely. The doctor glanced at me, then back at her. "This is urgent. Delaying treatment could—" I said no. Something in her tone made my stomach drop. It wasn't just refusal. It was control. Like she'd already decided what would happen to me, and I wasn't part of the conversation. My son Roderick stood near the doorway, shoulders slumped, staring at the floor. He looked uncomfortable, guilty even, but he didn't say a word. "Roderick," I whispered, my voice barely there. He flinched, but didn't look up. "Ma, you should have stayed home," Tiana muttered under her breath, just loud enough for me to hear. This is exactly what I was worried about. What she was worried about? I didn't understand. Nothing made sense. One moment, I'd been driving through Delaware, trying to get to Thanksgiving dinner at her house. The next, a deer had darted into the road, and I'd swerved. Metal had crunched, glass had shattered, and everything had gone black. Now I was here, broken and bleeding, and my own daughter was blocking the surgery that could save my life. Why? The nurse beside the doctor shifted uncomfortably. "We really need to move quickly. I need time," Tiana snapped. "I need to think." Think about what? My heart pounded harder, each beat sending fresh waves of pain through my body. The monitor beside me started beeping faster. A nurse reached over to adjust something, her face tight with worry. And then Tiana leaned closer, her voice dropping to a whisper meant only for me. "The paperwork is done, Ma. You don't need to worry about anything anymore." Paperwork? Her words landed like ice in my chest. What paperwork? I searched her face for answers, for warmth, for anything that looked like the little girl I'd raised alone after her father left. But all I saw was something I couldn't name, something hard and distant. And in that moment, lying there, broken and helpless, I realized the accident wasn't the most dangerous thing that had happened to me that day. My own child was. Before I tell you what happened next, I need to ask you something. Wherever you are right now, whether you're at home, at work, driving, lying in bed, trying to fall asleep, I want to know, what time is it where you are? Are you listening to this in the morning with your coffee or late at night when the world has gone quiet? Drop a comment and tell me. Tell me where you're from and what time it is. Because this story, what I'm about to share with you, it's not just mine anymore. It belongs to anyone who's trusted the wrong person, anyone who's been betrayed by someone they loved. And if this story reaches you the way it reached me, if it shakes something loose inside you, then please hit that like button. Subscribe, not for me, but because what I'm about to tell you needs to be heard. It needs to be remembered. Because the truth is, we don't talk about these things enough. We don't talk about how the people closest to us can become strangers, how love can rot into something unrecognizable if we ignore the warning signs for too long. So stay with me. What happened in that hospital room was only the beginning. Let me take you back.
My name is Lenora Hightower. I'm 63 years old, a retired social worker, and I've lived in Maryland for the past decade. But my roots, my real roots, are in New Jersey, where I raised my 2 children alone after my marriage fell apart. For most of my life, I helped families survive their worst moments: divorce, abuse, addiction, loss. I sat across from mothers who didn't know how to protect their kids. I held the hands of fathers who'd lost everything. I documented pain, filed reports, and fought for people who couldn't fight for themselves. I thought I understood betrayal. I thought I'd seen every version of it. But I never imagined I'd become the story I used to document. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Maybe because it was the one day when everything slowed down, when people remembered they belonged somewhere. Even after my parents passed, even after my husband walked out and left me with 2 kids and a mortgage I couldn't afford, Thanksgiving remained sacred. It was the one tradition we never broke. This year, my daughter Tiana was hosting for the first time. She'd bought a house in Virginia 2 years ago. Sleek, modern, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She was proud of it, proud of how far she'd come. Tiana had always been driven, sharp, relentless. She graduated top of her class, earned a full scholarship to college, and climbed her way into a corporate job as a financial analyst for a tech firm. She worked 60-hour weeks, traveled for business, and barely had time to breathe. But somewhere along the way, she'd grown cold. Phone calls became shorter, visits became rare, and when she did show up, she moved through conversations like they were obligations, something to check off a list before moving on to the next task. I thought I understood betrayal. I thought I'd seen every version of it. But I never imagined I'd become the story I used to document. Thanksgiving had always been my favorite holiday. Maybe because it was the one day when everything slowed down, when people remembered they belonged somewhere. Even after my parents passed, even after my husband walked out and left me with 2 kids and a mortgage I couldn't afford, Thanksgiving remained sacred. It was the one tradition we never broke. This year, my daughter Tiana was hosting for the first time. She'd bought a house in Virginia 2 years ago. Sleek, modern, the kind of place that looked like it belonged in a magazine. She was proud of it, proud of how far she'd come. Tiana had always been driven, sharp, relentless. She graduated top of her class, earned a full scholarship to college, and climbed her way into a corporate job as a financial analyst for a tech firm. She worked 60-hour weeks, traveled for business, and barely had time to breathe. But somewhere along the way, she'd grown cold. Phone calls became shorter, visits became rare, and when she did show up, she moved through conversations like they were obligations, something to check off a list before moving on to the next task. I told myself it was just stress, that success had changed her priorities, that she was too busy building her life to slow down for mine. But deep down, I felt it. The distance between us wasn't just physical, it was emotional, like she was pulling away from me on purpose, and I didn't know why. My son, Roderick, on the other hand, had always been my rock, steady, thoughtful, the kind of person who checked in without needing a reason. He worked as a supervisor at a shipping warehouse in New Jersey, lived with his girlfriend, and called me at least twice a week just to talk. But lately, even he'd been acting strange. Short texts, long pauses during phone calls, vague answers whenever I asked about visiting. Something had shifted between all of us, and I couldn't pinpoint when it started. Still, I packed my overnight bag that Wednesday morning, baked my sweet potato pie, the one my mother used to make, and loaded everything into my car. I was determined to make this Thanksgiving feel normal again, to close the gap that had opened between us. Maybe love just required persistence, I thought. Maybe families drift apart, but they always find their way back. I didn't know then how wrong I was. I didn't know I'd never make it to the dinner table.
The drive started quiet. Too quiet. I left my house just after 9 that morning. The sky was gray, heavy with clouds that threatened rain but never delivered. The roads were empty. Most people had already arrived at their destinations or were smart enough to wait until later in the day. But I wanted to get there early. I wanted time with my kids before the chaos of cooking and hosting took over. I tried calling Tiana about an hour into the drive. No answer. I frowned, but didn't think much of it. She was probably busy cleaning, prepping food, doing whatever needed to be done before guests arrived. 20 minutes later, I tried again. Straight to voicemail. That was odd. I replayed our last conversation in my head. She'd sounded irritated when I mentioned staying the whole weekend. "Just don't expect me to entertain you the whole time, Ma," she said, her tone clipped. "I'm not expecting anything," I replied gently. "I just want to spend time together." "Yeah, we'll see." We'll see. Those words had stung more than I wanted to admit. I shook the thought away and focused on the road. Delaware stretched out ahead of me. Flat, empty, endless. The kind of landscape that made you feel small. I thought about Roderick, about how quiet he'd been the last few weeks, about the way he'd hesitated when I asked if he was bringing his girlfriend to dinner. "Maybe," he'd said. "We'll figure it out." Why did everything feel so uncertain? I turned up the radio, trying to drown out the unease creeping into my chest. An old gospel song filled the car, one my mother used to hum while she cooked. I felt a pang of longing so sharp it made my throat tighten. I missed her. I missed the version of my family that used to feel whole. The highway curved ahead, and I eased off the gas slightly. The road was slick from earlier rain, and I didn't want to take any chances. That's when I saw it. A deer. It stepped onto the road so suddenly, I didn't have time to think, just react. I gasped and jerked the wheel to the right. The tires screamed. The world tilted. Everything happened at once. My car swerved, fishtailed, lost control. I saw the guardrail rushing toward me, saw the trees beyond it, saw the gray sky spinning overhead. Then, impact. Metal crunched, glass shattered. My body slammed forward into the seatbelt so hard I felt something crack inside my chest. Pain exploded everywhere. My ribs, my pelvis, my head. The car spun, once, twice, then slammed into the guardrail with a sickening crunch that rattled my teeth. And then, silence. My ears rang, my vision blurred. I tasted blood. I tried to move, but my body wouldn't respond. My hands were still gripping the steering wheel, knuckles white, fingers numb. I remember thinking, this isn't real. This can't be real. I remember hearing a car door slam somewhere far away. Voices, urgent, muffled. Someone was shouting, "Ma'am, ma'am, can you hear me?" I tried to answer, but my mouth wouldn't work. The last thing I remember before everything went black was the sound of sirens and the smell of burnt rubber.
When I woke up, I didn't know where I was. Bright lights, white walls, the steady beep of machines. My head throbbed. My chest felt like someone had placed a weight on it. Every breath was shallow, painful. A face appeared above me. A man in scrubs, his expression serious. "Miss Hightower, can you hear me?" I tried to nod, but even that small movement sent a wave of nausea through me. "You were in a serious accident," he said slowly, clearly. "You have multiple fractures, your pelvis, 3 ribs, and a hairline fracture in your collarbone. You also have internal bleeding. We need to do surgery immediately to stop it." Surgery. The word echoed in my foggy brain. I tried to speak, tried to say okay, tried to do something, but my mouth felt like cotton. That's when I heard her voice. No, absolutely not. My eyes shifted toward the sound. Tiana stood near the foot of the bed, arms crossed, her face tight with something I couldn't name. Anger? Fear? The doctor turned to her, confusion flickering across his face. "Ma'am, this is urgent. Without surgery—" She said no. She cut him off. "I need more information. I need time to think." Time to think? I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask her what she was talking about, but all I could do was lie there, trapped inside my own broken body, watching this surreal nightmare unfold. The doctor's jaw tightened. "Your mother could die if we don't act quickly." "I'm her medical proxy," Tiana said coldly, "and I'm telling you to wait." Proxy. The word hit me like a slap. I had signed papers years ago naming both of my children as my medical proxies, equally, not just Tiana, both of them. So why was she acting like she had sole control? I forced my eyes to move, searching the room. That's when I saw him, Roderick. He was standing near the door, hands shoved deep into his pockets, staring at the floor like he wanted to disappear. "Roderick," I whispered, my voice barely audible. He flinched, but didn't look up. "Tia, Ma," Tiana said, stepping closer, her voice dropping. "You should have stayed home. This is exactly what I was worried about." What she was worried about? I stared at her, trying to make sense of her words, trying to understand why my daughter, my own daughter, was standing between me and the surgery that could save my life. The doctor exchanged a glance with the nurse beside him. I could see the concern in their faces. "Miss Hightower," the doctor said gently, addressing me directly now, "do you want the surgery?" I opened my mouth to say yes. Of course yes. But before I could speak, Tiana moved closer, her hand resting on the bed rail. "She's confused. She hit her head. She doesn't know what she's saying." "I'm not," I started, my voice weak, but firm. "Ma, stop," Tiana interrupted. "You're not thinking clearly." The room felt smaller suddenly, suffocating. The nurse looked uncomfortable. The doctor's frown deepened. "Roderick," I tried again, louder this time. "Tell her." Finally, he looked up. His eyes were red, his face pale. "Tia," he said, quietly, "maybe we should—" "No," she snapped. "The paperwork is done. Don't start now." Paperwork. There it was again. "What paperwork?" I managed to whisper. Tiana's jaw clenched. Roderick looked like he might be sick. And then, in a voice so cold it barely sounded like hers, my daughter said the words that shattered everything. "Your house is in our name now, Ma. We filed the transfer last week." The monitors beside me started beeping faster. My house. My home. The place I'd worked for, sacrificed for, the place where I'd raised them. Gone. Transferred to their names without my knowledge, without my permission. "We needed to make sure things were handled," Tiana continued, her tone rehearsed, practiced. "You're not getting any younger. It's better this way." Better? I couldn't breathe. Not from the injuries, from the betrayal. My own children had stolen my home, and now one of them was refusing to let me have surgery. Why? The nurse moved toward the door. Probably to get help. Probably because she'd seen enough to know something was very, very wrong. Tiana didn't seem to care. She stood there, rigid, her face a mask of control. But Roderick? Roderick was cracking. "Tia, this is too much," he muttered, rubbing his face with both hands. "We shouldn't have." "Shut up," she hissed. "I can't do this," he said, his voice breaking. "Ma, I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." "Sorry?" I stared at my son, the boy I'd raised to be kind, to be honest, and I didn't recognize him. "Why?" I whispered. "Why would you do this?" He opened his mouth, then closed it. Tears welled in his eyes. "Because she convinced me," he said, his voice shaking. "She said you'd never agree. She said we had to act now or we'd lose everything." "Roderick, I swear to God," Tiana started. "No," he shouted, louder than I'd ever heard him. "I'm done lying." The room went silent. Even the machines seemed to hold their breath. Roderick turned to me, his face twisted with guilt. "She told me you were going to change your will, that you were going to leave everything to some charity, that we'd get nothing after everything we've been through." I felt like I'd been punched. "That's not true," I said, my voice trembling. "I know that now," Roderick interrupted, tears streaming down his face now. "But she made it sound so real. She had documents, emails. She said you'd been planning it for months." "Emails? Documents?" I looked at Tiana, and for the first time, I saw it clearly. The resentment, the anger, the bitterness that had been festering for years. "You lied to him," I said. She didn't deny it. Instead, she stepped closer, her voice low and venomous. "You want to know the truth? Fine. I'm tired. I'm tired of watching you act like everything is fair, tired of pretending like you didn't favor Roderick his whole life. Tired of working myself into the ground while you sit there judging every choice I make. I never—" "Yes, you did," she shouted. "When Grandma died, you split the inheritance equally. Equally. Even though I'm the one who took care of her at the end. Even though I'm the one who sacrificed my time, my career, my life to make sure she was comfortable. Grandma's well. My mother's estate. The money I'd split evenly between both kids because that's what my mother wanted. That wasn't my decision," I said weakly. "That was her will." "You could have fought it," Tiana shot back. "You could have stood up for me, but you didn't. You never do." Her words hung in the air, sharp and ugly. I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I was too tired, too broken. And part of me, some small, terrible part, wondered if she was right. Had I been blind to her pain? Had I failed her somehow without realizing it? But even if I had, even if I'd made mistakes, that didn't excuse this. "So, you took my house, and now you're refusing surgery?" She didn't answer, but Roderick did. "She said if you made it through surgery, you'd fight the transfer. She said we needed time, that if things got worse naturally, no one would question it." Naturally. The word made my stomach turn. My daughter had planned to let me die. Not directly, not with her own hands, but by standing in the way long enough for my body to give out. The door opened and the doctor returned, this time with another man in a suit. Security. "We need to resolve this now," the doctor said firmly. "Miss Hightower, are you capable of making your own medical decisions?" "Yes," I said, finding my voice. "I want the surgery." "She's confused," Tiana repeated desperately. "No," the man said. "We've reviewed your proxy documentation. Both of your children are listed equally, which means neither of you has sole authority to override the patient if she's conscious and competent." Tiana's face went white. "And," the doctor added, looking at me, "you have the legal right to revoke or change your proxy at any time." I hadn't even realized I'd asked for that earlier, but apparently I had, and they'd heard me. "I want them both removed," I said, the words coming out stronger now. "Ma, don't do this," Roderick pleaded. But it was too late. The damage was done. The masks had fallen, and I finally saw my children for who they really were.
The nurse who'd left earlier returned with a clipboard and a pen. Her face was calm, professional, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. She'd witnessed enough to understand this wasn't a normal family disagreement. "Miss Hightower," she said gently, approaching my bedside, "I need you to sign this consent form for surgery. Can you do that?" I nodded weakly. "Yes." Tiana moved fast. She stepped directly between the nurse and me, her body blocking access to the bed. "She's not signing anything," Tiana said firmly. The nurse didn't back down. "Ma'am, your mother has verbally consented to treatment. She is conscious and competent. We need her signature." "She doesn't understand what she's agreeing to," Tiana insisted. "I understand perfectly," I said, my voice stronger now, despite the pain. "I want the surgery." Tiana's eyes flashed with something dangerous. Desperation, maybe, or fear. "You're making a mistake," she said, looking directly at me. "You don't know what you're doing." But I did. For the first time in months, maybe years, I saw everything clearly. The doctor stepped forward, his tone firm. "Ms. Hightower has made her wishes known. We're moving forward with surgery." "I'm her proxy," Tiana shouted. "Actually," the man in the suit interjected, "we've reviewed the documentation. You and your brother are listed as equal proxies. Neither of you has sole authority, and the patient has the right to override both of you." Tiana's face crumbled, not with sadness, with rage. "This is ridiculous," she hissed. "Roderick, say something." But Roderick just stood there, tears still streaming down his face, saying nothing. The nurse handed me the clipboard. My hand shook as I reached for the pen, but I managed to scrawl my signature across the bottom of the form. It was done. Tiana made one last attempt. "You're going to regret this." "No," I said quietly. "I already regret not seeing this sooner." Security moved closer to Tiana, not threatening, but present. A quiet reminder that she couldn't stop what was about to happen. The doctor nodded to the nurse. "Prep her for surgery. We're going now." As they began wheeling my bed toward the door, I caught one last glimpse of my daughter. She stood frozen in the middle of the room, fists clenched, face twisted with fury. And Roderick, my son, he just looked broken. "Ma, I'm sorry." I didn't respond. I couldn't, because sorry wasn't enough.
The surgery took 4 hours. When I woke up in recovery, the pain was different, sharper in some places, duller in others. But I was alive. The nurse checked my vitals and told me everything had gone well. They'd stopped the bleeding, repaired what needed repairing. I'd need physical therapy, months of recovery, but I'd survive. I closed my eyes and let the relief wash over me. But it didn't last long. Because when I opened them again, there was a man sitting in the chair beside my bed. He wasn't a doctor. He wore a dark jacket, a badge clipped to his belt. His expression was kind but serious. "Miss Hightower," he said gently. "My name is Detective Marcus Hall. I'm with the county police. I need to ask you a few questions when you're ready." "Police?" My heart sank. What's this about?" I asked, my voice hoarse from the breathing tube. He leaned forward slightly. The hospital staff contacted us. They had concerns about what happened before your surgery, about possible coercion and financial exploitation. I blinked, trying to process his words. Your children, he continued carefully, specifically the property transfer he mentioned, and the refusal of medical care. These are serious allegations. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to defend them, to make excuses, to say it was all a misunderstanding. But the other part, the part that had been lying on that hospital bed, terrified and betrayed, knew better. They took my house, I whispered. Without telling me? He nodded slowly, pulling out a small notebook. Can you tell me when you first learned about the transfer? Today, in the hospital, right before surgery. He wrote something down. And you didn't authorize it? No, never. He asked more questions about the timing, about any conversations I'd had with Tiana or Roderick in the weeks leading up to Thanksgiving, about my will, my finances, my health. I answered as best I could, though my head felt foggy and my chest ached with every word. Miss Hightower, Detective Hall said after a long pause, I need to tell you something. Your son came forward about an hour ago. My breath caught. Roderick? Yes, he's downstairs right now giving a full statement. He's cooperating completely. Relief and heartbreak hit me at the same time. What did he say? I asked. The detective hesitated, then spoke carefully. He admitted that the property transfer was done without your knowledge. He said your daughter convinced him it was necessary, that she told him you were planning to cut them out of your will. I closed my eyes, fresh tears burning behind my eyelids. He also said, the detective continued, his voice softer now, that your daughter wanted to delay your surgery, that she believed if your condition worsened naturally, it would be easier to maintain control over your assets. Naturally. There was that word again. My daughter had been willing to let me die. Roderick didn't want to go through with it, Detective Hall added. He said he tried to back out multiple times, but your daughter pressured him, manipulated him. I thought about my son standing in that hospital room, guilt written all over his face. The way he'd looked at me, the way he'd apologized. He'd been trapped too. Not innocent, but trapped. What happens now? I asked. We're investigating, the detective said. The property transfer, the timing, the medical proxy situation, all of it. If there's evidence of fraud or elder exploitation, charges will be filed. And Tiana? His jaw tightened slightly. She left the hospital shortly after your surgery. We're trying to locate her now. Of course she did. Of course she ran.
It took 3 weeks for them to find her. 3 weeks of recovery, physical therapy, and waiting. I spent most of that time in a rehabilitation facility, learning how to walk again. Roderick visited every other day, guilt etched into every line of his face. We didn't talk much at first, just sat together in silence while I worked through exercises. But slowly, painfully, we started to rebuild something. He told me everything. How Tiana had planted the idea months ago. How she'd shown him fake emails suggesting I was planning to donate everything to charity. How she'd convinced him that taking the house was the only way to protect their future. I should have known better, he said one afternoon, his voice thick with regret. I should have asked you directly. Yes, I said simply. You should have. He nodded, accepting it. I'll do whatever it takes to make this right, Ma, I swear. And I believed him. Meanwhile, the investigation moved forward. Detective Hall called me with updates. The property transfer had been rushed, signed with forged notarization. Financial records showed Tiana had been researching estate law for months. There were text messages between her and Roderick discussing the plan. The evidence was overwhelming. And then finally, they found her. She'd been staying with a coworker in New York, lying low, trying to figure out her next move. When the police showed up, she denied everything, claimed it was all a misunderstanding, that she was trying to help me, that Roderick was lying to save himself. But the evidence contradicted every word. Charges were filed: financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, fraud, attempted coercion. Roderick, because he'd cooperated fully and shown genuine remorse, received a deal: probation, community service, restitution. But Tiana? She faced real consequences. The legal process took months. Court dates, depositions, lawyers arguing over intent and evidence. I had to testify, had to sit in a courtroom and recount everything that had happened, had to look at my daughter across the room and tell the truth about what she'd done. She didn't look at me once. In the end, the judge ruled in my favor. The property transfer was reversed. My house was returned to me. Tiana was convicted, sentenced to 2 years with the possibility of parole. And just like that, it was over. But not really. Because the damage, the real damage, couldn't be undone by a verdict. I'm back in my house now. It took months of physical therapy, but I can walk again. Slowly, carefully, but I can walk. Roderick still visits. He's trying, really trying. We're working on forgiveness, though it's not a straight line. Some days are easier than others. But Tiana? I haven't heard from her since the trial. No letters, no phone calls, no apologies. And honestly, I don't expect any. Because I've come to understand something painful but true. Some people would rather hold on to their anger than admit they were wrong. Looking back now, I see the cracks that were always there. The resentment that built over years, the silence that I mistook for peace. I thought I was being a good mother by not pushing, by giving her space, by letting things settle on their own. But silence doesn't heal wounds. It just lets them fester. If I'd confronted Tiana years ago about her feelings, about the inheritance, about favoritism, about whatever pain she was carrying, maybe things would have been different. Or maybe not. Maybe some people need someone to blame, and no amount of conversation will change that. But I learned something crucial through all of this. Love doesn't excuse harm. Family doesn't erase accountability. And sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away from people who refuse to see you as anything other than an obstacle. I spent my whole life helping other families navigate their pain, but I ignored my own. I ignored the warning signs, the growing distance, the unspoken resentment, and it almost cost me everything. So if there's one thing I want you to take away from my story, it's this. Don't let silence become a substitute for honesty. Don't assume love will fix everything if you just wait long enough. Because sometimes, waiting too long means the damage becomes irreversible. Speak up. Ask the hard questions. Confront the uncomfortable truths before they turn into something you can't come back from.
Now, I want to hear from you. Have you ever been betrayed by someone you trusted? Someone you loved? Maybe it was a family member. Maybe it was a friend. Maybe it was someone you never thought could hurt you. How did you handle it? What did you learn? Drop a comment and tell me your story. Because these conversations matter. These truths matter. And if this story resonated with you, if it shook something loose or made you think about your own relationships, then please share it. Share it with someone who needs to hear it. Someone who might be ignoring warning signs in their own life. Because the more we talk about these things, the less power they have over us. Hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Not just for me, but for yourself. Because stories like this remind us that we're not alone, that betrayal doesn't define us, that we can survive even the worst wounds. And before you go, I want to offer you something. I've put together a guide, a resource for anyone navigating complicated family dynamics, financial abuse, or difficult relationships. It's filled with practical advice, legal information, and emotional support strategies. You can find the link in the description below. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being here. And remember, your voice matters. Your truth matters. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise.